All right, I think we're going to jump in. Thank you everyone for joining us. Before we get started though, I'd like my colleagues just to take a minute to introduce themselves. I'm Cristina Martinez. I'm the Director of Long-Term Recovery and Major Initiatives for Adams County. So I'll turn it over to Glenn and then Kylan.
Hello, good morning. Glenn Robinson, Deputy Director for Human Services.
I'm Kylan Mueller, and I'm a management analyst in the county manager's office, and I'm here for all of the questions in the background.
We couldn't do it without Kylan, so thank you so much for your help, and thank you everyone for joining us today. So just a little bit of housekeeping. You may have noticed that you are on mute and your cameras are off. You can ask questions though throughout the presentation using the Q&A feature. You'll see that probably down at the bottom or maybe on the side, depending on what your screen view is. And then at the end of the presentation, we'll also open it up to verbal questions. So you can raise your hand and Kylan will moderate that portion of the discussion. So feel free to, like I said, drop in questions via the Q&A feature throughout the presentation, and then we'll open up to a dialogue at the end of the presentation. So I'm just going to go ahead and jump in. So what are we going to be talking about today? Just a little bit of high-level information about the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA, and the funding that's been made available to Adams County. And then specifically about our grant program, who should apply, when to apply, how to apply, our funding criteria, and then the priorities that have been set out by our federal partners, the governor, as well as the Board of County Commissioners. And then, as I mentioned, we'll jump into Q&A at the end. So just to set the stage, the American Rescue Plan Act funding, Congress set aside $350 billion for qualifying state, local, and tribal governments from across the country. Colorado itself received $3.8 billion, and then Adams County separately received $101 million. We've received this funding in two distributions. So we have currently $50 million in the bank, and then next summer, we're anticipating getting our second distribution of about $50 million. So what are we going to do with the first $50 million that we have in hand? The Board of County Commissioners has decided to divide that $50 million into three pieces of a pie. So the first is really what we're here to discuss, which is our external grant program, $35 million, about 70% of the overall funds that we received from our first distribution. We've also set aside $10 million for internally identified projects. And those are a variety of new positions that are required. So thinking about Glenn and his team over at Human Services, I know that they saw a 30% increase in applications due to COVID. And so really wanting to make sure that we have the capacity to be able to address those needs, that we're able to take care of individuals that are relying on Adams County for services. And then the last piece of the puzzle is contingency. As we know, COVID has continued to evolve, continued to throw twists and turns our way, and we just want to make sure that we have some dollars set aside for whatever may be next in response to the pandemic and unforeseen needs that may arise. So that's how our first $50 million is getting divvied up. So thinking about that $35 million, our grant program, who should apply for these funds? We're trying to cast as wide of a net as possible to make sure that every organization that has needs within Adams County has the ability to apply for these funds and be competitive against its peers and other applicants. So we want businesses of all sizes to consider applying for funding, non-governmental organizations, nonprofit organizations, school districts, and special districts. We know that special districts are one branch of government that did not receive funding directly from through ARPA. So we wanted to make sure that they had the opportunity to apply as well. So when to apply? So right now we're in our informational webinar stage. We started last week. We're continuing through the end of this week. We have one more today, another on Thursday, and then a Spanish language one available on Friday. We divvy them up on based on topic area, based on the priorities that the county commissioners identified. But just want to let everybody know that the content itself is the same. The questions that we receive may be a little different based on the participants, but we're recording all of them. We'll make them available on our website. So if if you know of partner staff members who weren't able to join, they'll be able to watch these at a later date. So on November 1st is when our application period actually opens and we go live. The board has agreed to allow a 30-day application period. So applications will be due on November 30th, and then we'll need some time as an internal organization and committee to be able to review the applications, score them, and then ultimately make recommendations to the Board of County Commissioners, who will decide who our successful grantees are. And those awards will likely be made in early 2022. So how do folks apply? It's going to be an online application that will go live on November 1st. You'll be able to find it at the website that you see on the screen. And then, of course, we always have to do our little disclaimer that submission of a grant application is not guarantee of funding, but we do encourage if you are interested to apply. One of the questions that we received in our last session is whether organizations can submit more than one application. Yes. Organizations can submit more than one application as long as the scope of work being presented is different and distinct. So if you have a couple of different program ideas or a program and a project that you would like for us to consider, please feel free to submit as many applications as you think is suitable for your organization, as well as your capacity to be able to implement if you were funded for more than one. So funding criteria, how are we going to decide who receives funding and how folks are ranked? So we have 4 types of funding criteria. We have first and foremost, our federal requirements. Every application needs to meet the federal requirements to be considered. And I'll dive a little bit deeper into what that means shortly. And then we have governor identified priorities. There's 4 of those. And then we have county goals. This is how our organization operates. These are our strategic goals for the county. There's 5 of those. And then lastly, we have our county COVID priorities. Those were identified by the Board of County Commissioners, and there are 10 of those. So we'll go a little deeper into those 4 different categories. So federal funding criteria, where do they start? Number 1, this all needs to be in response to COVID. We know that there are a lot of other needs in the community, really good ideas, but everything needs to be tied to COVID and the public health emergency. So we need to understand how the program, service, or other intervention that you're proposing is in response and addresses impacts created by COVID-19. So again, everything has to be tied to COVID and in response to the impacts of COVID. So you're gonna hear me emphasizing that statement over and over and over throughout the presentation. So our funding criteria will continue is must have endured negative economic impact or impact due to the COVID-19 public health emergency. Your organization must be in good standing with state and local taxes, any appropriate licensing or state or federal requirements, and must be in compliance with applicable local codes and ordinances. You must also be in good standing with the Colorado Secretary of State. And we are also asking you to report any other governmental, private, or charitable assistance that's been received to address the COVID emergency. We're also going to be asking separately if you have received any funding from the county in general over the last 3 years, whether that's related to this project or not. And then we did also agree that any national, state, or local elected office holders with business interest will not be eligible for funding. So continuing with our funding criteria, we have no minimum or no maximum application amount. So that means no idea is too big or too small to be considered. We really want to make sure that we're addressing the needs. We are allowing any and every organization to come through the application process for consideration. We do want to note, though, that funds must be expended by December 31st, 2024. We are moving a little quicker than many of our counterparts because we know that there are needs today. And so that means we want folks to get started sooner rather than later when it comes to implementation once they are awarded funds. And then lastly, funds must serve Adams County residents only. Organizations that serve other counties can and will be considered throughout this process, but we need to clearly understand how your program, how your intervention, how it's serving Adams County residents in particular. We're going to need that to be tracked from a financial perspective as well as a data perspective, separately and distinctly from any other clients that you may have. And then once again, funds requested must be used in response to COVID-19 itself or the harmful consequences of the economic disruptions resulting from or exacerbated by the public health emergency. So when you are applying, you're going to see a list that is similar to what you see on your screen today. The federal government has identified 7 different expenditure code categories. So the first one that you see on your screen is public health. So if you were wanting to provide vaccination clinics, you would select 1.1 as the expenditure code that ties to your program. If you're wanting to, if you need PPE for your organization, that would be 1.5. So you have to select at least one, but you can select all that apply. You can select multiple federal expenditure codes in your application. Category number 2 is negative economic impacts. You'll see there's a few categories there. Household assistance, and that's everything, you know, knowing who we have on the webinar today. That's food programs, that's rent, eviction prevention, as you can see, a number of other wraparound services, unemployment, job training. Well, I also anticipate for us to see a large number of selections in 2.10. So that's direct aid from an organizational perspective to nonprofits. Same thing for 2.9 for businesses. And then other impacted industries, 2.12. Category number 3 is services to disproportionately impacted communities. So this is more so focused on the education side as well as healthy childhood environments. And then housing support and social determinants of health. Category number 4 is premium pay. I know that I have spoken to some of our special districts who are considering applying for premium pay. What that means is those are dollars that are awarded to staff that are above and beyond their normal salary and benefits. It cannot supplant somebody's regular salary and benefits, but is on top of or in addition to what they already earn. Category number 5 is infrastructure. This is related to clean water, drinking water, sewer, and broadband. Number 6, revenue replacement. This is really for Adams County. This is revenue replacement for provision of government services. And then number 7 is for Adams County as well, which is our administrative expenses, evaluation and data. The federal government is really emphasizing evaluation and data that comes along with this funding. So we're going to need to build our capacity. We have an internal working group that is working on defining metrics and that will work with our grantees as they're awarded to determine what data we'll be expecting our partners to provide on a regular basis. So those are our federally identified priorities. These expenditure codes, there is a link on a resource slide at the end of the deck that has a link to where this document is pulled from. If you want to take a look at it, it's a compliance and guidance regulation document. To me, that's the one that I found the most helpful. There's a number of different resources available on the Treasury website, but I would encourage you to take a look at that document in particular. And like I said, there will be a link available for you. Governor's COVID-19 priorities. So the governor is a little more focused than our federal partners. He's identified 4 priority areas, as you can see on the screen. There are 2 different types of structures that are convening right now, and their task is to provide recommendations to the legislature as well as to the governor for potential legislation for the 2022 session. You can see the dollar amounts that are going to be made available for those. What that actually looks like is yet to be determined, but we wanted to be able to track programs that are focused on these 4 priority areas. If your project or program does not meet one of these 4 priority areas, that's okay. You're not going to be penalized, but we just want to be able to capture this information so that we can work with you if there are additional financial opportunities that are made available through session, through the legislature's actions next year. Next, we have Adams County goals. We have additional information on the website available that dives a little deeper into what each of these mean. So you can see the high level categories. This is really how we focus and operate as an organization, and we want to make sure that the projects and priorities that you all are putting forward continue to advance the goals of the county. Next, we have our BOCC COVID-19 grant funding priorities. There will be extra points that will be allocated for projects that are focused on these 10 priority areas. So you may be asking how these 10 priority areas were established. If you remember at the beginning of COVID in May of 2019, the county actually established a number of community work groups that were led by the Board of County Commissioners to really address to the ever-changing needs and challenges that were being presented by COVID. Those groups met through the end of 2019. There were 2 of them that were continued. They all made recommendations. There were relationships that were built. And so the commissioners felt comfortable based on those committees and the needs that they saw that were identified through that process, as well as ongoing through direct outreach and feedback to them and staff, that these were the 10 areas that they felt were most important for us to focus on for Adams County. And I also want to highlight the blue bar that you see down at the bottom, which is really our foundation of equity and putting people first. We want to make sure that these projects are very clear on how they're addressing equity. And so you'll see, which may be new and different for many of our applicants, a really big focus through the application on understanding how you as an organization are working on equity. And that includes identifying your board and staff demographics, how many people of color are on your team. Do you have veterans, women, kind of what are those gender mixes, as well as ownership demographics for businesses. And then we're also going to ask you to describe what inequities your work and project are looking to address, who you serve, and et cetera. You can see the additional questions that we'll be asking on the screen. So really think about how your work is going to focus on inequities. And I just want to be very clear, what that means is race and ethnicity, as well as lower socioeconomic individuals. We know that there's a lot of intersectionality between those 2 groups of people, including within Adams County, and the federal rule is very clear that it wants these dollars to be focused on addressing historical inequities that were exacerbated due to COVID. So after we go through our process, after you apply, we make our recommendations and the board decides who's funded. What's going to happen after that point in early 2022? So these are the 5 items that we want you to be aware of. Number 1, we're going to be asking for monthly financial reports, monthly data reports. As I mentioned, we'll work with you as an organization to determine what that data utilization is going to look like. The feds have specifically called out logic models, thinking about how many people are being served, but also what are the outcomes of that service that's being provided to individuals. We're going to ask you to sign a legal agreement with the county. We will be conducting site visits that will work with you on an individual basis to determine what that looks like. And then as a reminder, organizations will agree to expend any funds awarded by December 31st, 2024. So these are a number of resources that I have found helpful as I jumped in. Some of you may or may not know, I started in this job just a short 3.5 months ago. So I have been working quickly and diligently to get up to speed on everything that is available related to ARPA. So the first link that you'll see is our Adams County website. This is where you will find webinar registration. This is where you'll find the recordings. This is where you'll find FAQs that we're actively working to develop, as well as where you will apply starting on November 1st. The second link is a link to Treasury. As I mentioned, the compliance and reporting guidance, which has been my go-to reference document, as well as the interim final rule. And I do want to note, for some of you that may be following ARPA very closely, the final rule has not been issued, but Treasury has stated that as long as we are working in good faith to implement based on the interim rule as written today, that we are good to go and proceed as we would like. DOLA has a number of recovery funding sources. I wanted to make that available because at the end of the day, you may decide that this is or is not the right fit for your organization, but DOLA has a number of additional funding sources that may be complementary to this application or may be a good fit for other projects that your organization is working on. OEDIT continues to have really good resources for our business community. And then the next one is the National Association of Counties. They have created a clearinghouse that has a number of very good resources for you that might be helpful as you're thinking about how to frame your application and your project. And then lastly, the Government Alliance on Race and Equity, really giving you some tools to think about how you should be focusing your project on race and equity. And that's the end of the presentation. So at this point, I will leave my contact information up just for a moment. That's my cell phone number, so feel free to call or text. That's my email address. I want to be a resource to you as you are thinking through this process. If you want a thought partner, if you want initial reactions to a project, please feel free to reach out. And if I'm not able to help you, I know that my colleagues like Glenn and others across the organization will do our best to be able to support you and think through potential projects that you may have. So with that, I'm going to stop screen sharing, and then Kylan will turn it over to you to help facilitate our Q&A portion.
Awesome. Can we hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. First one is I'm with Mission. Can you?
Kylan, I'm sorry, before we jump in, I see that Alicia is on. Can we promote her?
Absolutely.
And then Alicia, the rest of the team, we introduced ourselves at the beginning. If you wouldn't mind just sharing with our participants who you are in your role, that would be wonderful.
Good morning, everyone. It took me a moment to handle all the technology this morning. So glad to see everybody. Alicia Reese, Deputy County Manager, just here to assist however I can provide help.
And awesome, Kylan. We have another team member, Jenny Grafton, if she can be promoted as well.
On it.
This is giving you all a chance to get your questions ready and get the hard balls ready as well. So Jenny, if you can introduce yourself.
Hey, Grafton, Director of Community and Economic Development. And I'm sorry, I had to go away and rejoin, so I might have missed something. But happy to help however we can.
Awesome, thank you. All right, Kylan, we'll turn it back to you.
All right, our first one is I'm with Mission Arvada Navigation Center in Arvada, which is in Jefferson County. This webinar was shared with us as an opportunity, but do we have to be located in Adams County?
So your organization does not have to be located within Adams County, but the services that you provide do have to be for Adams County residents only. So if that's helpful, I know we have a number of partners that are based in Denver or other communities, and we hope that they will, we have strong relationships with them, and we know that they have a history of serving Adams County residents. So hope that answers your question. No, you don't have to be located within Adams County. Yes, you do have to serve Adams County residents only with any funding that is received.
Right. And then our second is, will other COVID funding and or other county funding affect the outcome of our applications?
We just want to have a holistic picture of the resources that you have available, as well as the sustainability of the project and proposal that you're bringing forward. So it won't help or hurt, but we do want to have an idea of the overall finances that are available for a project. Anybody else want to add to that? Okay.
That is all we have right now. Anyone else would like to type one in? We have a panel here.
Yeah, or feel free if you want to raise your hand. Kylan will take you off mute if you feel more comfortable asking a question verbally as well.
Does the federal expenditure code 3.8 include foster parents and kinship parents?
That is a very specific question, so give me a moment to get to that. Okay, so 3.8 is healthy childhood environment, services to foster youth or families involved in the child welfare system. And can you repeat the question one more time?
Does the federal expenditure code 3.8 include foster parents and kinship parents?
It doesn't provide any exclusions. So that's the kind of overarching category. So I think that we would be open to applications that would address those. Glenn, do you have any additional thoughts?
Oh, you hit it on the head.
Okay.
All right, one is, I came a bit late to the webinar. Where can we find the RFP?
So the application will be made available. It'll go live on November 1st. So it's a grant application versus an RFP. And we have the website in the slide deck, but we can drop it in the chat as well.
And then we have, who within Adams County can help our agency navigate zoning restrictions within the county and some of the water right challenges related to properties potentially considered?
Sure. So we'll certainly be working through the development side of things in community and economic development. The county is not in control of a water utility specifically. So some of those answers, as we get into specifics of water, we would just be working with the appropriate water and sanitation district.
Awesome. Will the links on the second to last slide or this presentation be made available to us?
Yes, the slide deck will be made available on the website as well. And I'm just going to drop that link into chat.
Perfect. And then we have
Oh,
one.
sorry, I said sent it to all panelists. Let me send it to all attendees. There we go.
And then there was one that this is listed as the youth and families webinar, and the rest of the webinars are listed as specific funding priorities as well. Are all the webinars the same information with nothing specific about those funding areas?
The content of the presentation is the same, so is the slide deck, but we, as you can see, we have Glenn and Jenny joining us today. We've had various department staff based on the topic area so that they are available to answer questions that might be outside of my scope of knowledge. And so we also anticipated that there might be questions that folks from that particular service area might be interested in hearing from their peers and fellow serving organizations.
Would you partner with us if some muscle is needed in negotiating related to the timeline of these ARP timing?
Can you tell me a little bit more or be willing to come off, raise your hand so that you can be unmuted to tell us a little bit more about that question?
That's a follow-up to the water question. Would you partner with us?
Are you talking about specifically funding related to ARPA requirements and timing of that? Because I don't know that we have the ability to, but that's a Christina part of the question as it relates to if the county would provide some support in getting a development application through and making sure that we had internal sense of urgency, then I think the answer is yes.
Ashley, did you want to clarify your question? You should be able to unmute yourself. There we go.
I can unmute myself. Thank you. Yes, I think that helps. Again, it's trying to navigate and, because the time frame is what, December 2024, and my understanding is we get into some of the discussions about properties we're looking at, or again, just acquiring some land. We've looked at some in the past, and the water rights have been almost a stopping point, and or the zoning restrictions, or trying to get a zoning changed. We've run into some problems negotiating and understanding the time frame as far as how quickly zoning could be changed if needed. So again, we've run into some questions, and it's sort of put us on hold while we tried to figure out what the timeframes were to get, you know, a property zone from, say, maybe it's residential, and if we're going into sort of a little bit larger footprint, trying to get it rezoned. There's costs, prohibitive costs involved, and or the water. You know, one property we found there was no water rights related to the property at all.
Yeah.
So that sort of was a surprise.
I know we've talked about this some too. I think we have to be careful how we answer it, because obviously this is for all of Adams County. And so the funding availability, a lot of properties would fall within jurisdictions. So it may be a question that Commerce City has to answer, or Thornton has to answer relative to their own process. Speaking for the areas in unincorporated Adams County that would go through county offices for processing, I think probably the best advice to give relative to acquisitions is it's a good rule of thumb to follow kind of HUD's best practices, which is you really want the zoning in place already before you would go and make the acquisition with funds like this. Because if there was any possibility that it didn't go through public process for approval, it puts the buyer in a really awkward position. So I think that's probably something we would want to look at in the evaluation of an application, is whether or not those steps had already been completed, because there is no guarantee on that.
Okay, great. And that matches our previous foray, I'd say, down that rabbit hole. And again, we got to the point where you're like, oh, wait a minute, it's not zoned the way we need it. Then that price is not relevant. So yeah, it's a learning process as far as some of the zoning. Thank you.
All right, we've got two more, it looks like. Will BIPOC-centered / led organizations be prioritized in the funding opportunity? And does COVID recovery also include community organizing, advocacy, policy work to address systemic failures that made COVID-19 issues worse? So I don't know if those are two separate that you want to address.
Yeah. Yeah, so we'll take those separately. So the first half of the question, will BIPOC led organizations be prioritized? They will receive additional points in the scoring process. And then, we have a number of categories that will be receiving additional points, and that's why we're looking to collect the information around the leadership and the staff and the board composition, is to be able to award those points accordingly. To look at the second half of the question, we are open to any type of application that you would like, as long as it is in response to COVID-19. That's the one thing to remember and to center your application on, is how is this in response to the impacts of COVID-19. We know that COVID-19 has shined a light for some. Many of us have known that these inequities have existed historically, but these inequities have been exacerbated by COVID. So as long as the application is able to help us understand how the work and the proposal is tied to COVID-19, we would be open to considering those type of projects. Anything anyone else would want to add to that? Okay.
Our final one that we have so far is, should this application show a 3-year proposal, or can we apply again within the next 3 years?
Great question. So to clarify, funds have to be spent by December 31st, 2024. That does not mean that you need to have a 3-year project or proposal. You can do, a 6-month project. You can do a 12-month project. So there is no requirement to utilize that entire time. That is just the deadline by which all funds must be expended. And then, I'm going to look at the question again. What did it say?
Should
Question about reapplying.
go 3-year, or can we apply again?
Oh, can you apply within the next 3 years? Thank you for that. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. So right now, the Board of County Commissioners has designated $35 million for this initial grant period. The board has not made a decision for its second distribution of $50 million. So we do not know if the board will, is interested in continuing a second cycle. We do not know if the funds will be dedicated based on the outcomes of the legislative priorities. We do not know if there may be additional federal funds that are made available. So, I would not count on there being a second grant period because it's unknown right now. So if you are interested in applying, I would strongly suggest that you submit an application starting November 1st, because we don't know what may or may not be available in the future. Alicia or anybody else, would you want to add to that? Okay. Any other questions?
All we have so far.
Okay, if not, we will give folks a little bit of time back on their calendar. Thank you so much for joining us. Team, thank you for being here to answer some questions, and for our organizations to see some familiar faces. And feel free to reach out to us, and we look forward to seeing applications roll our way starting November 1st. Thank you all.
Thanks.